I think about myself, you know, in the 1980s, 90s, I took Econ 101 and, you know, we grew up in a neoliberal moment. And regardless of my political views, I guess I nodded accordingly when I was told markets are the most equitable, efficient way of allocating resources, and all ships will rise with the rising tide, and better to deregulate, and globalization is good. You know, I think one can intellectually say, fine, those are good ideas. And, you know, we all nodded. And all the while that was going on, there's all this other evidence, at least about the process, you know, wage stagnation in the middle and all these people suffering. And I guess I heard that, but still I could nod as a, you know, whatever expert. Yeah. And say, in the end, it's all going to work out. And maybe I'm an idiot, but okay, that's a mistake of hubris. And then the idea is, well, we need new paradigms, maybe new people, but that's, you could see change coming through better ideas. But if fundamentally the problem is like the norms of leadership have just, on the left and right, have been tossed, and it's all about self-dealing now, that's a different kind of problem. I mean, that calls for, that's revolution, that's regime change, that's man the barricades rather than write a different textbook. And I know they're intertwined, but which one is really the issue today?
Well, if we think about the protests going on just now, if you will, the second wave of Black Lives Matter and the protest grip in the US, these are clear claims to moral outrage. These are clear claims to, you are self-dealing, you are hypocrites, you do not actually apply the law equally, right? That's exactly that kind of revolutionary situation. But I think it varies by, you know, area in this regard. I think another way of putting it, rather than the sort of the hubris on one side and then the self-dealing on the other side, is simply the fact that as the world has become more integrated and globalized and all those things that we grew up with, it's a natural human tendency for us to discount information that doesn't go with our priors. We see this in politics, but we also see it in economics and everything else. If you grew up believing free trade is good for you, you will defend that argument, even if there's lots of evidence coming the other way. And I still defend parts of that argument. It doesn't mean the whole thing is wrong, right? So it takes a while. I'll throw another Keynes quote at you. The problem is not so much the lack of new ideas, it's the trouble of escaping from old ones.
Sure.
And that lag effect, I think, combines with the real issues of self-dealing and then basically, you know, in a sense, the software no longer matching the hardware, to produce a world in which you get a lot of uncertainty, and that leads towards the type of dynamics we see with Angrynomics.
Okay, so let me restate it to make sure I've got it. The idea is, there are a bunch of bad ideas out there, ideas that have obsolesced before people in power recognize that. And because they're slow to respond, that creates this opening for, you know, in your words, tribal identity, tribalism, and that kind of anger to be used as a technology, that some people will weaponize this. While the experts are slow to respond, you get the, you know, you name it, the Berlusconis, the Trumps, who weaponize this stuff, and you get the moment we're in today.
Yes, but it's not just manufactured in the sense that it is actually real things that people are responding to. I mean, I'll give you an example of this. So, and also how it's weaponized. So if you watch the American media, let's use that horrible term, the mainstream media, when they had the lockdown protests, you bet everybody in the world saw the half a dozen people or a dozen people that turned up with the militia, right? Very few of us saw the picture of the 2,000 people who were also there without guns, who were essentially saying what we say all the time, but kind of feed out. So there was a Federal Reserve study a few years back that said that 40% of Americans, could be even more actually, would have trouble getting $400 together in an emergency. Well, at the time of the Michigan lockdown protest, that emergency started 2 months ago and the checks hadn't arrived yet. Meanwhile, they're watching the television and they're saying that the Federal Reserve has basically said, if you're rich and you have assets, don't worry, we'll buy everything. Now that disconnect, you don't have to have a higher degree in economics to understand who's got the airbag and who doesn't, right? And who has insurance and who doesn't, and who's paying the costs and who doesn't. And that's what's real, and that is what's being partially weaponized. But we also want to acknowledge that this is absolutely legitimate. And the fact that folks like you and I have been tone deaf for so long is a real problem.
I was reinforcing your point by saying that a similar phenomenon is happening here in Europe. Let me give you an example. Over the last 5 years, I've been having very disconcerting experiences, but in a nice way. I usually have disconcerting experience, but this is, I'm leading up to a pleasantly disconcerting experience. I'll give you an example. And it's not a unique example, it has happened many times, but it was a very striking example. I was in Hamburg, Germany.
Yes.
Your mother's country.
Yes.
And in the morning, I was invited, and I was paid quite well, to give a speech to 600 German bankers. Not exactly my audience, as you can imagine, right?
Yes.
I went, well, the money was good, but primarily because I want to find out what on earth they wanted of me.
Yes.
You know, I was the former finance minister who said no to the Troika, who clashed with the German government. What the hell did they want with me? And you know what? I realized they were shitting their pants. They were very worried about the state of financial capital in Europe. And they wanted a perspective from somebody that would not simply regurgitate what they wanted to hear.
Right.
And that night, I gave more or less the same speech, differently nuanced, but the same kind of analysis, to a group of activists of the M25, of our Democracy in Europe movement, at Hamburg University. And I got standing ovations from the bankers and the radical left-wing students. And that's when I realized that capitalism is in serious trouble. Yeah, and that has repeated itself again and again. But it's not just the United States and Europe, it's also China. Friends of mine who know China and Chinese universities well tell me that there's a very strong Marxist tradition, which is still, you know, under the radar screen, but it is happening. There are very serious critiques of the Chinese Communist Party from a Marxist perspective. They get repressed and so on, but you know, there is hope there.
Yes, that is my experience exactly here in the United States. I am more hopeful than I have ever been in my life. And you can see from my white hair, I've been around a while. I can't sometimes believe what is possible. To give you an idea, over the next 3 or 4 weeks, I will be giving an invited address to the New York City Bar Association, the lawyers and judges who want to hear a Marxist perspective on what is going on. It is extraordinary. I won't convince them, but they feel they need to know, and I think it's the same that you got from the bankers in Hamburg, that their system, if I can dare say so, is not only in trouble, but their system may not survive. The combination of pandemic and the worst crash since the Great Depression, I mean, either one of those would be enough. The two together, then you start having flashbacks to the Black Death in the 14th century in Europe, things like that, where you never quite recover from the level of disorganization that this collapse. And there's a widespread understanding in the United States, from left to right, that the system is breaking down. I mean, the consciousness that we are about to have an election in November, in which, in a period of the worst crisis anyone can remember, we are supposed to choose between Trump and Biden. That is itself a symptom of failure, a symptom of catastrophic failure. And that the only hope of Mr. Biden is, as you put it at the beginning, to get us back to normal, of course, creates for you and me the opportunity to remind people what that normal was and why it was that that normal became the catastrophe that we are living through. And I think the situation has changed. And if I could put a political spin on it, the openness now, the opportunity now, means that it is up to us, the left, the progressives. Now is our opportunity. I don't know when another opportunity like this will present itself, we have to now. We have an audience, we have people looking for some new direction. It ought to be us that organizes that instinct, that sentiment, that growing feeling. And as the situation here deteriorates, which it is doing, I think the opportunities are also, it's dangerous, but the opportunities are also growing and growing quickly.
So far, the private sector has given every indication that they don't understand that there's a pandemic going on. They have no humanity. You know, they talked about social responsibility. They talk about all these fancy words about now we get it, we understand, we have an important role to play in our society, and they're acting in just the opposite way. A dollar for them is worth thousands of people dying in the emerging markets. So I think this is going to be a critical moment for global capitalism. If the global financial markets continue in their hard-headed way of squeezing these emerging markets, you know, Nora Rabini was talking about the battle that's going on, the new Cold War. Well, American-style capitalism is going to take a beating if America's financial markets continue to behave in the way that they've been behaving.